AD Kassadin is my favourite build of all.
A YouTuber / Twitch streamer, known online as Cryobeats, was found dead today. Still sat at his computer where he was allegedly telling people, AD Kassadin is cool. Police are currently investigating the cause of death and who might have done it.
That dream was like a premonition. Should I really make this video? That's a good way to go. AD Kassadin is my favourite build of all time. I know how that sounds. There's a story behind it and a reason to build it, even if it's not for you. For me anyway, it's now inextricably bound to me forever. So let me give you the whys. Maybe not the why you should do it, because I'd like to live, but all of the others, for sure. So why build AD Kassadin? Well, for starters, he has a sword. Okay, for real, I have a long attachment to this build and I refuse to let it go. Plus it does work. But let's quickly start from the beginning, including why I made this build in the first place. On patch 5.4, so a long time ago now, Kassadin's ultimate was reduced from 700 range to 450, almost cut in half, and this was known to be the biggest nerf to Kassadin ever. He was practically pronounced dead on patch. Mind, over the next few years towards modern Kassadin, who is once again banworthy, he had received AP ratio buffs to his ultimate, and from this point at patch 5.4, they haven't happened yet. In fact, since patch 4.4, he didn't even have an AP ratio on his R, instead exchanged for a mana ratio only. Though the range nerf was the focus for most, he did get compensation buffs in another way through a mana cost reduction. Though changing the mana cost from 75 to 60, then from 60 to 50 next patch, and finally from 50 to 40 towards the end of Season 10 might not seem significant, that includes reducing the 4-stack Riftwalk cost, where it doubled in mana cost with each stack. So the maxed Riftwalk cost went from 1,200 to 960 to 800 to 640 as it is today. That's like half the cost, meaning it was much more spammable and perhaps a good DPS option. See where this is going? So what's good with DPS? Well, as a melee champion with a shorter range dash, being tankier helps you reach that range easier, plus survive longer to keep that DPS, damage per second, up. With his mana ratio, tanky mana items from those seasons like Frozen Heart, the at the time Iceborne Gauntlet and Abyssal Mask, and Rod of Ages were fantastic options for the build. And you know how you can turn all of that mana into more damage? With the offense-oriented tier upgrade, Muramana. Oh, Cryo, you were so smart, picking Muramana since his R had no AP ratio, and you'd be applying its effect back then twice on his W since it's both an auto and a single target ability, and also it's an auto reset, so that's like 3 times. And the AD on hit nature was better for a tanky DPS build? Yeah, I have to admit, I actually made this build on like patch 5.2 before these changes, because I thought it would be funny if the sword guy used a sword. Okay, so the build came from a stupid reason, but it far surpassed my expectations as the patches went on. Though its significance dropped as his AP ratios were reintroduced and eventually buffed, mana items changed too and were far fewer and less versatile, and significantly, the tier items changed a lot as well. But so long as the build functions, I just can't let it go. It's actually my favorite build ever. It was so freaking fun. Okay. So you want to know how it functions today. Muramana's changed. There are fewer mana items, and moreover, this is a mana tank build, so we're focusing more on those tanky, not AP items, a little more than the AP ones. But first, here's a damage build with Seraph's Embrace, using all these AP damage items. In one rotation, it dealt 4,687 damage to this target dummy, stats shown at the top left. Seraph is converting mana to AP, which is in turn scaling all of Kassadin's abilities. So what about Muramana? Here's this one same ability rotation, and it dealt that much damage. Surprised? Whereas Seraph's completed passive effect grants you a defensive benefit, Muramana's completed passive is all about offense, adding an on hit to all of your autos and spell hits. Even with 4 stacks of Riftwalk, Muramana's combo damage is coming out on top by a bit. Now, you might have to wonder if the extra damage is worth the AD build path and losing Seraph's shield, but we'll come back to this. Comparing the DPS, Seraph's Embrace with full stacks at max level using abilities off cooldown with this build has a DPS mostly between 1300 to 1400, though can spike to about 1500. With Muramana instead, the DPS is actually near enough the same, though with part of that power coming from auto attacks rather than abilities and Riftwalks. Muramana builds will likely have better DPS before level 16 when Riftwalk is on a higher cooldown. So going back to the tank build, here's the same rotation compared, swapping only the tier items. As you can see, Muramana wins out, and in a DPS comparison, the two tier items come out roughly equal with a level 16 Riftwalk. But at levels 11 and 6, Muramana's on-hit effect is looking mighty fine. Naturally, the more your build specs into AP, especially something like Death Cap, the stronger that level 16 power spike is going to be, and more so with Seraphs. Even if Muramana is offering a little more burst damage, for a full damage build, it's at a steep cost, losing that Seraph's shield. So the shield of Seraphs in an AP build has a similar function to the tank items we have in our build, but does have a cooldown and a counter. So with a purpose and identity for our build, let's actually talk about it. Our core is Muramana, aiming to finish the mana money when the tier is complete. Usually this is second if you can afford it. Other core items are anything with tankiness and mana, which is kinda limited to these three items. Rod of Ages is easily the most powerful and versatile. Frozen Heart is a fairly extreme but now inexpensive mana and armor item with a useful passive. And Zeke's is questionable but actually quite useful in practice, and once again, quite cheap. The slow it provides, so easy to misfire when you're ulting about, can provide a very nice slow field for your team to catch up on your initiation, and for you to keep up those melee Muramana slaps. It's otherwise a little slot inefficient with its stats, but if you need even more armor, it's not actually that bad. Since there are no mana magic resistance items, you'll be mostly looking at the usual suspects, Cainic Rukurn for very heavy magic damage, and Abyssal Mask, both good for defense or offense respectively. Just one more word on Rod of Ages. Though it is the most powerful item you can take for the playstyle, and I do recommend it in most games, it does take 10 minutes to get to its full potential, and you have to ask if you have that much time. In a good game, you can finish Muramana and purchase its second item after Rod of Ages, but that's two items with no specific resistances, potentially leaving you vulnerable to powerful fed enemy team members. In some cases, Rod of Ages is skippable, as sometimes the team needs a valuable member now more than a godlike member later. As an example, if the enemy had very fed ADs, just going for Frozen Heart is a cheap and effective counter while you build up Muramana, and as a mana item it still scales your damage. Similarly, you might be in a problem lane yourself, and buying the specific resistances can be more cost efficient than going for the health and mana spread of Rod of Ages to help you survive and farm. You could take this another way and opt for an offensive option instead, including mana money, though it's certainly questionable. This opens the query, what about the other mana items? Malignance is a powerful item for sure, and between it and Lunan's Companion is more appropriate for our build. With a ton of mana and AP, it's an absolute powerhouse with the mana helping damage through Riftwalks and Muramana as well. And the ultimate haste, like Ultimate Hunter, helps a lot with the longer cooldown pre-16 Riftwalks. The burn is okay as well, with a helpful magic resist reduction on enemies burned by it. If you need the damage, it's a great option but has no defense whatsoever. If you're stacking too many of these pure offense options, powerful though you may be, you're no longer playing Tank Kassadin and will have to change back to an AP Kassadin's playstyle and mindset. So what, then, is the playstyle and mindset of a Tank Kassadin, and is it in any way better than the standard AP? Well, if we trust that the pro players and teams are always eyeing the patch notes looking for the best of builds, they would have probably already started doing it, but they're not. So it probably isn't the best for competitive games. However, it's also not bad, even with the 0 AP variants. The playstyle is different, and so while it's easy to focus on the one-shots you now can't do, it's just as easy to forget the tanking and aggression you now can do. In a way, it's a more relaxed Kassadin build, allowing for more blunders through tankiness, ability haste, and mana, but yet it's also exhilarating, as those same qualities that allow these mistakes also grant extra capacity for aggression, dashing, hit and run strategy, and just straight up sitting on someone with repeated Riftwalk mana farts. Though Zonia's in its current state is a wonderful item on AP Kassadin, there is a pronounced difference between one-shotting someone and then going into stasis, versus just taking reduced damage while maintaining your movement. Long story short, it's probably not better, not at all. I'll take that L. Even if once upon a time it was legitimately better, maybe. We can't test that now. Though what is true is that it's fun as heck. The near infinite mobility, the thrill of chasing a W mana reset and just how much it gives back, and the euphoria of auto resetting with W to donut your opponent like a JoJo villain. With Manatank AD Kassadin featuring Muramana, you're aiming to power spike hard at level 11 with a completed Muramana and tanky items like Rod of Ages and Frozen Heart to get in close and stick to carries like glue, but not completely shying away from bruisers and tanks. By diversifying your build a bit, you can opt for other off-meta choices like Titanic Hydra, allowing an auto-attack reset for another hit of that Muramana, while also being a cheaper wave clear item than spamming out your Riftwalks, meaning it'll be on low stacks and low cost for when you need to escape after a split push. Experimental Hexblade works as a strange alternative to Malignance, offering a little more in the way of tankiness, providing AD and attack speed, especially after you've ulted. This allows for more Muramana DPS, and you also do have a rather small on hit on your W passive. This item on the build is definitely experimental for sure, but not a totally bad idea. Sticking to the mana items and defensive options is going to be your safest bet, and it's always best to learn the rules before you break them. As for your runes, the tanky fighter nature of the build loves Conqueror, but if your laning phase needs fleet footwork, then by all means take it. You can experiment with other keystones if you like, and I, for one, am a big fan of Unsealed Spellbook, as this build ends up being a great vessel for many summoner spells, and has a particular love for the otherwise inaccessible spell, Clarity, and the ton of mana it restores. Otherwise, rune as you see fit. Alacrity isn't a bad choice over Tenacity with our focus on Muramana, and Mana Flow Band is useful all around. If you're going for the domination tree, then Ultimate Hunter is a worthy pickup since we spike at 11 near enough as much as we do at 16. The key with this build is to play like you're tanky. If you don't ever learn your limits, you'll never be able to aggressively use this build's potential. The extended tank of mana you're building gives you so much more reach and mobility. With tankiness that prevents you being prevented from going where you please, means that you can stand up to both ADC and support together, even with their tank too. Actually, you know what? You could probably jump into 5 people and still live long enough to Riftwalk back out. You won't know until you try. Since the defense options available are quite specific, it's important you keep that in mind. Buying Frozen Heart and Zeke's isn't going to protect you from an overfed Mordekaiser, and you should avoid his realm like the plague, but careful assessment of what you can and can't do with your build is what will separate it from the full AP Kassadins. So sit on some carries, sponge up some skill shots, Riftwalk all the way from top to bot, and don't let anyone stop you, because you're far too much effort to try and do so. All because you're literally built different. I hope you enjoyed and hope this made sense. I'm trying to keep this both concise enough to be short and understandable, but have to emphasize, yeah, it's a playstyle difference, not really a this build's better kind of deal. It's probably worse, and it might not be for you, but be it nostalgia or arrogance damning me to it, I'm going to keep using this build so long as it functions, and maybe you can enjoy watching that instead. So once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Shoutouts to the members AJBeat91, Warsquid, Ultimate Ground, Kaide, My Dad, and Era, Gentleman Zeta, Lunar Eagle 1996, 53rd Alabama Booty Obi-Wan Kenobi, AC Immortal, Mr. Noodle, and Baz1378 for supporting the channel. Thank you all very much.